The Chosen One falls between worlds, torn from fire into a galaxy where hope itself has died. His mechanical limbs now rebuilt by those who worship machines, Anakin Skywalker finds himself surrounded by zealots and ancient terrors. Here, in the endless war of the 41st millennium, the whispers that once seduced him seem almost gentle compared to the screaming warp that hungers for his soul. Can the man who failed to bring balance to one universe become the fulcrum that saves another? The heavens split as reality tore. A wound in the fabric of existence itself bled crimson into the ash-gray skies above Armageddon. Embers from a distant world spiraled through the rift. Volcanic heat from another universe scorched the already war-blasted atmosphere. A single figure plummeted through this impossible breach, trailing fire and darkness. His scream of rage and anguish echoed across dimensions, carrying the weight of betrayal, loss, and hatred that transcended universal boundaries. The man who fell from the sky was both less and more than human. His limbs severed, his flesh charred, his lungs filling with toxic fumes. Yet power radiated from him, a terrible psychic pressure that pressed against the minds of all sentient beings for leagues around. This was Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, torn from the moment of his fall on Mustafar and cast into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. The impact crater smoldered for 3 days. Imperial guardsmen would not approach it, claiming to hear whispers in their minds, promises of power and redemption that made their noses bleed and their dreams fill with visions of golden fields under twin suns. Only when the Black Templars arrived did anyone dare venture closer. Marshal Roderick Vane led the squad personally, his ancient power armor wheezing and grinding as he approached the center of the devastation. The Crusaders' enhanced senses detected life amid the wreckage, impossible as it seemed. What he found would alter the fate of Armageddon forever. A man, or what remained of one, clung to life with unnatural tenacity. Both legs severed at the knee, one arm ending in a charred stump, skin blackened and cracked like the surface of a dying star. Yet his eyes remained fierce, burning with an inner light that spoke of power beyond mere human endurance. Vane ordered the stranger placed in stasis immediately. He recognized the touch of the warp about this stranger, but something else too, something older, purer in its dichotomy. The Marshal made the sign of the Aquila over his chest plate and uttered a prayer to the God Emperor. This man would either serve or die. The Medicae facility beneath the Templars' fortress monastery hummed with activity. Servitors moved with mechanical precision, attaching augmetic limbs to the burned form laid out upon the surgical slab. Tech priests intoned binary prayers to the Omnissiah as they worked, begging forgiveness for the alien technology they incorporated into the stranger's reconstruction. Recovered from the impact site were fragments of technology unknown to the Imperium, crystalline components that resonated with harmonic energy, focusing power in ways that defied conventional mechanicus understanding. The senior Magos insisted these components be studied rather than destroyed, a rare moment of techo-heresy that would have earned immediate execution had Marshal Vane not personally vouched for the decision. 300 days passed before Anakin Skywalker opened his eyes to his new reality. He awoke to the sound of battle prayers and the smell of sacred unguents. Heavy limbs of burnished metal replaced those he had lost in fire, his ruined lungs now supplemented by implants less sophisticated but more brutally effective than what he might have received in his home galaxy. When he finally spoke, his voice was a mechanical rasp, processed through vocalizers embedded in his throat. "Where is Padme?" he demanded of the hooded figure attending him. "Is processed. She safe?" The interrogator chaplain made note of the name in his leather-bound tome. The stranger had spoken many names during his fevered sleep. Padme, Obi-Wan, Palpatine. The chaplain had catalogued them all, searching Imperial records for any hint of these individuals among known heretics or Xenos contacts. He found nothing. "You are aboard the battle barge, Sigismund's Oath," the chaplain explained. "You were recovered from the surface of Armageddon. The Emperor has seen fit to spare you, though for what purpose remains to be seen." Anakin tried to rise but found himself bound to the surgical table by adamantium restraints. His mechanical limbs whirred and strained against the bonds. They held, but the metal groaned in protest, prompting servitors to move forward with sedatives ready. The chaplain raised a hand, halting them. "I sense power in you," the black armored figure said, his skull helm regarding Anakin with empty eye sockets. "Psychic potential that would see you, burned on most Imperial worlds. But the Black Templars are pragmatic when necessity demands. Marshal Vane believes you may serve a purpose." Rage flooded through Anakin, the familiar heat of anger, his constant companion since childhood. He reached for the Force instinctively, expecting to feel the comforting flow of energy responding to his will. What he encountered instead sent shudders through his augmetic frame. The Force existed here, but twisted, corrupted, screaming with the voices of trillion souls. What had been a calm ocean was now a raging maelstrom. Anakin recoiled mentally, cutting himself off from the horrific torrent of energy that threatened to overwhelm his sanity. "What have you done to me?" he growled. "We have kept you alive," the chaplain answered simply. "The Emperor will decide whether that mercy was warranted." Days turned to weeks, as Anakin struggled to understand the universe into which he had been cast. The Black Templars kept him isolated in a warded chamber, allowing him contact only with the interrogator chaplain and occasionally Marshal Vane himself. They questioned him relentlessly about his origins, his abilities, the technology from which his lightsaber had been constructed. Anakin answered truthfully, finding no reason to lie. The concept of other galaxies, other realities, did not shock his interrogators as much as he expected. They spoke of the warp and its inconsistent relationship with time and space, of rifts that occasionally allowed passage of entities from beyond known reality. "Your presence is unprecedented, but not inexplicable," Vane told him during one such session. "The question remains what to do with you." Anakin learned quickly about the Imperium of Man, its endless war against chaos, xenos, and heresy. The God Emperor on his golden throne, sustaining humanity through his eternal sacrifice. He recognized echoes of the Republic in its bureaucracy, the Jedi in its Inquisition, the clone army in its Imperial Guard. But everything here was darker, corrupted by millennia of constant warfare and eroding hope. This was a galaxy where the dark side had already won, where balance had been forgotten in favor of mere survival. His first test came when an Orc warband breached the perimeter defenses of the Fortress Monastery. The Xenos had grown bold in recent months, launching increasingly sophisticated raids against Imperial positions. The Black Templars responded with characteristic fury, counter-attacking with squad-strength forces led by Sword Brethren. Marshal Vane personally freed Anakin from his restraints and presented him with a power sword. "Prove your worth, stranger," the Marshal commanded. Anakin held the unfamiliar weapon, feeling its crude power compared to his lightsaber, yet it hungered for blood in a way his elegant weapon never had. As if sensing his thoughts, Vane produced a second item, a metal cylinder scorched by heat and impact. "Your weapon was damaged beyond repair," the Marshal explained, "but the tech priests believe they have preserved its core components. The energy focus crystal remains intact, though its housing required extensive reconstruction." Anakin took the lightsaber with his mechanical hand. The weight was wrong, the balance altered by Imperial manufacturing techniques. But when he triggered the activation stud, a blade of pure energy erupted from the emitter with a familiar snap hiss, not blue as it once had been, nor the crimson he had only just claimed before his dimensional exile. This blade burned a fierce, purified white, crackling with barely contained power. The Black Templars stepped back as one, hands instinctively moving to their own weapons. Only Vane remained steady, watching Anakin with calculating eyes. "Now we shall see what the Emperor has delivered unto us," the Marshal said. The Orc assault came like a green tide against the monastery walls. Hundreds of the brutal Xenos hurled themselves forward, crude weapons raised, their guttural war cries echoing across the blasted landscape. Anakin moved alongside the Black Templars, still weak from his long recovery but driven by the need to prove himself, to find purpose in this new existence. The Force remained distant, alien, but he could still feel its currents moving around him, guiding his actions with fragmented visions of imminent futures. The first Orc he encountered was a massive specimen, nearly 3 meters of muscle and primitive cybernetics. It swung a jagged blade fashioned from scavenged metal, a blow that would have cleaved a normal man in two. Anakin sidestepped with preternatural speed and brought his lightsaber across in a precise arc. The energy blade passed through the Orc's weapon, armor, and flesh with equal ease, leaving the creature staring in momentary confusion at its own bisected torso before collapsing in a heap. The ease of the kill surprised even Anakin. These creatures were physically formidable but telegraphed their attacks with crude obviousness compared to battle droids or clone troopers. He moved deeper into the fighting, his white blade a beacon amidst the chaos of battle. The Black Templars fought with religious fervor, each kill accompanied by a prayer or litany. They were unsubtle but effective warriors, their faith providing a bulwark against fear or hesitation. Anakin found himself admiring their certainty even as he pitied their blind devotion. How different were they, really, from the Jedi he had once served alongside? Both bound by dogma, both serving masters who demanded absolute loyalty. An explosion rocked the battlefield, throwing Anakin forward. His mechanical legs absorbed the impact, servos whining in protest. Through the smoke he saw a massive Orc war machine, a crude approximation of Imperial Walker technology. It stomped forward on mismatched legs, its weapons already finding targets among the Templar lines. Black armored bodies flew through the air as explosive rounds detonated among their ranks. Marshal Vane bellowed orders, redirecting his forces to counter the new threat. But their heavy weapons were already engaged against other targets. Anakin felt something stir within him, the familiar call of power, of taking control when others faltered. He reached out, not with his augmetic hand but with his mind, feeling for the currents of energy that had once come so naturally to him. The warp responded, but erratically, dangerously. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose, the raw power threatening to tear his consciousness apart. He struggled to focus, to impose his will upon the raging energies. The effort brought blood trickling from his nose and eyes, but he persisted. The Orc war machine froze mid-step. Metal groaned as invisible forces gripped it from all sides. Anakin felt sweat beading on his burned scalp as he poured more of himself into the effort, compressing, crushing, dominating the machine with telekinetic might. The Orc pilot, inside, screamed in its bestial language, hammering controls that no longer responded. With a final surge of effort, Anakin closed his fist. The war machine imploded, collapsing in on itself in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The battlefield fell momentarily silent, Templars and Orcs alike turning to stare at the impossible display of psychic might. Marshal Vane was the first to recover. "Forward!" he roared, his power sword raised high. "For the Emperor!" The Black Templars surged into the stunned Orc ranks, butchering the Xenos with renewed vigor. Anakin stood motionless, blood now streaming freely from his nose and ears. The effort had cost him dearly. He felt hollow, drained in a way that using the Force had never left him before. The warp was a hungry thing, it seemed, taking as much as it gave. He wondered dimly if this was what sustained use of the dark side would have eventually done to him had events on Mustafar played out differently. Before he could contemplate further, darkness claimed him, and he collapsed amid the carnage of battle. Anakin awoke to the familiar surroundings of the Medicae chamber. This time, however, he was not restrained. Marshal Vane stood at his bedside, accompanied by a figure Anakin had not seen before. A woman in ornate armor of burnished gold, her head shaved and bearing extensive augmetic enhancements where her left eye should have been. She studied him with an intensity that reminded him uncomfortably of Jedi Masters evaluating a Padawan. "You displayed considerable power on the battlefield," Vane said without preamble. "Power that should have seen you immediately executed as a psyker under normal circumstances." "But these are not normal circumstances," the woman interjected. Her voice was surprisingly melodic despite the Vox grill that distorted it slightly. I am Inquisitor Katerina Greyfax of the Ordo Hereticus. Your presence here has come to the attention of the Inquisition, as all psychic phenomena must. Anakin regarded her warily. He had learned enough of Imperial hierarchy by now to understand the authority this woman wielded. The Inquisition answered to no one save the Emperor himself, their word literally law across countless worlds. They were judge, jury, and executioner with unlimited authority to purge anything they deemed heretical. "What happens now?" he asked, his mechanical voice betraying no emotion. "That depends on you, Anakin Skywalker," Greyfax replied. "You claim to come from beyond our reality, cast here through some quirk of what you call the Force. Your abilities mark you as a psyker of considerable strength, yet untrained in our methods of control and containment." "I was trained as a Jedi," Anakin corrected her. "We learn control from childhood." "Your control failed spectacularly on the battlefield," Greyfax noted with clinical detachment. "You channeled raw warp energy without proper wards or mental discipline. Such actions typically result in possession by never-born entities or complete psychological collapse. The Force is different here," Anakin admitted. "Corrupted, tainted." Greyfax smiled thinly. "What you experience is the true nature of psychic energy in our universe. The warp is a reflection of all sentient emotion and thought. After millennia of war, suffering, and hatred, it has become a realm of nightmare and madness. Only through rigid discipline and faith in the Emperor can one safely wield such power." Marshal Vane stepped forward. "The stranger has proven his worth in combat. My chapter would claim him for the crusade against the Orc menace on Armageddon. His abilities could turn the tide in critical engagements. And when he loses control completely, when his untrained mind becomes a conduit for demonic incursion within your very fortress," Greyfax questioned sharply. "The Codex Astartes is clear on the matter of unsanctioned psychers." "The Black Templars do not adhere to the Codex," Vane countered, a hint of ancient antagonism in his voice. Anakin watched the exchange with growing understanding. Political maneuvering existed in this universe just as it had in his own. Power structures vying for control, for resources, for souls. He had been a pawn in such games before. He would not be again. "I will choose my own path," he interrupted, his mechanical voice cutting through their argument. Both turned to regard him with surprise, clearly unaccustomed to being addressed so directly by one they considered their subordinate. "I have served masters before. I have knelt before power and wisdom and found both wanting. If I am to exist in this universe, it will be on my terms." Greyfax laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "You misunderstand your position, outsider. There are no terms. There is only service to the Emperor or death." "Then we share a philosophy after all," Anakin replied, rising from the Medicae slab. His augmetic limbs whirred as he stood to his full height, towering over the Inquisitor though not matching the transhuman stature of Vane. "For I too believe in absolutes." What happened next occurred too quickly for unaugmented human perception to follow. Anakin reached out both physically and mentally, calling his reconstructed lightsaber from where it lay on a nearby table. The weapon slapped into his mechanical palm and ignited in the same motion, its white energy blade casting harsh shadows across the Medicae chamber. Servitors moved to intercept him, but were hurled backward by invisible force, crashing into diagnostic equipment. Vane reached for his bolt pistol but found his arm locked in place, held by telekinetic grip. Only Greyfax reacted in time, her hand dropping to the neural whip coiled at her hip. The weapon unspooled like a living thing, crackling with disruptive energy designed to overload nervous systems and machine spirits alike. It lashed toward Anakin with unerring accuracy, guided by the Inquisitor's centuries of experience hunting rogue psychers and heretics. The whip never reached its target. It froze mid-air, its energy dispersing harmlessly as Anakin exerted his will upon it. Blood began to trickle from his nose again, but his concentration never wavered. "I could kill you both," he said quietly, "but that would solve nothing. I need to understand this universe, to find my purpose within it. For that, I need freedom of movement and action. Release me, witch, Vane snarled, his enhanced muscles straining against the invisible bonds holding him. You will never leave this fortress alive, Greyfax added, her artificial eye glowing as hidden systems activated. Terminate protocols are already engaging throughout the monastery. Witch hunters are converging on this location. Anakin knew she spoke the truth. He could sense movement throughout the structure, the purposeful advance of armed figures toward the Medicae chamber. Yet he also sensed something else. A distant call, a psychic beacon pulsing at the edge of his awareness. Something vast and ancient, recognizing his presence across the void between stars. It felt almost like the Force as he had known it, but concentrated, personified, intelligent. I think we are about to have larger concerns, he said, just as alarms began to howl throughout the fortress monastery. The Vox units in the chamber crackled to life. Multiple void signatures detected, announced an urgent voice. Configuration unknown. Emperor, preserve us, they are appearing throughout the system. Greyfax paled visibly. The xenoform, she whispered. They sensed your psychic display, predicted our response, used you to divide our forces. What xenoform? Anakin demanded, though a growing suspicion formed in his mind. The call he sensed was fundamentally alien, utterly inhuman in its cold precision. Necrons? Vane answered, his anger momentarily forgotten in the face of a greater threat. Ancient Xenos with technology millennia beyond our cell. They have been dormant on Armageddon for centuries, buried beneath the equatorial deserts. And now they awaken, Greyfax concluded grimly. Your presence has disturbed something, outsider, something better left sleeping. The fortress rocked as the first impacts struck its void shields. Through the armored viewing ports, Anakin could see darkness descending from the sky. Not ships as he understood them, but vast geometric constructs of living metal, green energy crackling along their impossible angles. They moved with perfect coordination, ignoring conventional physics as they positioned themselves above Imperial strongpoints across the visible landscape. Release me, Vane demanded again. My chapter must respond to this threat. Anakin considered his options. He could attempt escape during the confusion of battle, seek out the source of the psychic call that tugged at his awareness, or he could stand with these humans against an inhuman enemy. In that moment, memories of the Clone Wars flooded back to him, of standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers against the separatist droid armies, of purpose found in protecting others, even as his soul darkened with each life he took. He released his telekinetic hold on both Vane and the neural whip. I will fight alongside you, he said, not as a slave or servant, but as an ally against a common enemy. Greyfax regarded him with suspicion, but pragmatism won out over dogma. Very well, she conceded. But know that my judgment is merely postponed, not withdrawn. Vane activated his armor's Vox unit, barking orders to his chapter forces. Coded phrases that Anakin did not fully understand, but which clearly initiated predetermined defense protocols. The Marshal turned back to Anakin, his skull-faced helm, revealing nothing of his expression. You will accompany my command squad, he stated. We will counterattack directly against the largest Necron concentration. The Xenos must be driven back to their tomb, complex, where prepared explosives can seal them once more. I need to know what I face, Anakin replied. These Necrons. Their capabilities, weaknesses. Greyfax stepped forward, interfacing directly with a data terminal through her augmetic implants. The display flickered to life, showing skeletal metal figures advancing in perfect lockstep formation. Their bodies were composed of a dull metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their eyes burning with the same green energy that powered their weapons and vessels. Necrons are an ancient race that predates humanity's emergence from Terra, she explained rapidly. Their physical forms are composed of living metal capable of self-repair. Conventional weapons inflict damage that is quickly reversed. Energy weapons are more effective but still limited in long-term impact. They utilize technology beyond our comprehension, including teleportation, phase shifting, and weapons that strip matter apart at the molecular level. Anakin absorbed the information quickly, his tactical mind already formulating approaches. And their command structure? Hierarchical, Vane answered. Warriors form the bulk of their forces, mindless automata following programmed routines. Above them are immortals, more heavily armed and capable of limited tactical decision-making. Lords and overlords direct overall strategy, ancient beings with individual personality and will. Destroy a lord, and its forces may temporarily lose cohesion. Then we target their leadership, Anakin concluded. Vane nodded once, a gesture of professional respect. The Emperor's will be done, he intoned, before turning toward the armory adjacent to the Medicae facility. Servitors were already bringing forth the Marshal's personal weapons, blessed instruments of destruction that had claimed thousands of Xenos' lives over centuries of service. Anakin followed, his reconstructed lightsaber humming with anticipation. As they marched through the corridors of the fortress monastery, Black Templars fell in behind their marshal. Grim-faced warriors in ancient power armor, some bearing scars and augmetics that spoke of centuries of warfare. They regarded Anakin with open suspicion, but none questioned Vane's decision to include him in the counterattack. In the face of Xenos invasion, all other concerns became secondary. They emerged onto the monastery's primary landing pad as night fell across Armageddon. The sky above had transformed into a geometric nightmare, Necron vessels hovering in impossible formations that strained the human mind to comprehend. From these craft poured streams of green light, each depositing squads of skeletal warriors onto the blasted landscape below. Imperial defense batteries responded with thunderous fury, but most shots dissipated harmlessly against invisible energy fields surrounding the alien vessels. Vane led his force toward a waiting Thunderhawk gunship, its engines already cycling to combat readiness. Before they reached it, the air between them and their transport shimmered with unnatural energy. Reality itself seemed to part, revealing a rectangular portal of absolute darkness. From this impossible doorway emerged a procession of Necron warriors, their metal bodies gleaming dully in the reflected light of battle. At their center stood a taller figure, its skeletal form draped in scaled metal that might have been a cloak on a living being. In one hand it carried a staff topped with a pulsing green orb, in the other a blade of impossible thinness that hurt the eye to look upon directly. Overlord. Vane spat the word like a curse. Stand ready, brothers. The Black Templars formed a firing line with practiced precision, bolters raised and aimed at the Necron forces. Anakin stood slightly apart, his lightsaber humming at his side, but not yet raised to guard position. He studied the Necron overlord with intense curiosity. There was something familiar about it, something that resonated with his own experiences. The machine that was once alive, the soul trapped in artificial form. A mirror darkly reflecting his own fate, had circumstances on Mustafar played out as the Emperor intended. The Overlord stepped forward, its movements unnaturally fluid for something constructed of metal. When it spoke, the sound emerged not from any visible mouth, but seemed to materialize directly in the minds of all present, a telepathic communication that bypassed conventional hearing. Anomaly. The Necron addressed Anakin directly. You are not of this reality. Your presence disturbs the celestial orrery. Calculations cannot account for your interference in the great work. Anakin felt the weight of ages behind the words, the accumulated knowledge of a species so ancient they had witnessed the birth of stars that now died. What great work? He asked, speaking aloud, though he sensed the Overlord would perceive his thoughts regardless. The closing of the Kroof circle. The final victory against the hungering gods that your kind feed with your emotions and beliefs, the Overlord responded, its head tilted slightly, a disturbingly organic gesture from something so mechanical. You have touched both sides of the immaterial. Light and dark in balance, not yet corrupted by extremes. a curiosity we had thought extinguished from this galaxy eons ago. Vane raised his power sword. "Enough Xeno's deception," he declared, "for the Emperor." The Black Templars opened fire as one, a fusillade of mass-reactive bolts streaking toward the Necron forces. Most found their mark, blowing chunks from skeletal frames or decapitating warrior forms completely. Yet, even as the damage was inflicted, green energy played across the wounded Necrons, metal flowing like liquid to repair the destruction. Warriors that had been completely destroyed simply vanished in flashes of the same verdant light, teleported back to their vessels for more extensive repairs. The Overlord itself had not moved, allowing a shimmering energy field to intercept any rounds directed toward its more ornate form. It continued to regard Anakin with what might have been curiosity in a living being. "Your allies fight with admirable determination," it observed dispassionately. "They cannot comprehend that this conflict was decided before their ancestors first discovered fire." Anakin ignited his lightsaber fully, the white blade casting harsh illumination across the landing pad. "The future is always in motion," he countered, falling into a guard stance. "No outcome is ever truly fixed." "A perspective born of limited existence," the Overlord replied. It raised its staff slightly, green energy coalescing around the orb at its tip. "We shall study your anomalous nature more thoroughly once you are contained." The energy discharged in a focused beam that crossed the intervening space instantly. Anakin raised his lightsaber instinctively, catching the attack on the energy blade. The two technologies interfaced with catastrophic results. The lightsaber's kyber crystal resonated with the Necron weapon's discharge, creating a feedback loop that sent both combatants staggering backward. Around them, Black Templars and Necron warriors continued their battle, bolter fire and energy beams crisscrossing the landing pad as the two forces engaged at close quarters. Anakin recovered first, his mechanical limbs compensating for the feedback shock more quickly than the Overlord's ancient systems. He launched himself forward, augmetic legs propelling him across the intervening space with superhuman speed. The lightsaber swept down in a precise arc, aimed at the Overlord's staff arm, seeking to disarm rather than destroy. The Necron Lord parried with its impossibly thin blade, the two weapons meeting with a sound like reality tearing. To Anakin's shock, the Necron blade stopped his lightsaber completely. The energy of his weapon scattered against the alien, metal, unable to cut through as it did nearly all other materials. The Overlord used his momentary surprise to counterattack, its movements blindingly fast despite its mechanical nature. The thin blade whistled toward Anakin's throat, a killing blow delivered with mathematical precision. Anakin threw himself backward, the blade missing him by millimeters. He felt the currents of the warp responding to his danger, showing him fractured glimpses of imminent futures. Dodging left would result in disembowelment. Parrying directly would lock their weapons again. Retreat would allow the Necron warriors to surround him. He chose none of these options, instead reaching deep into the power he had touched during the Orc attack. Blood immediately began to flow from his nose, but he ignored it, focusing his will into a telekinetic hammer blow directed at the Overlord's chest. The impact sent the ancient machine staggering backward, its metallic feet leaving furrows in the rockcrete surface of the landing pad. The Overlord regarded its own body with what might have been surprise, green eyes flaring brighter as it processed this unexpected development. Manipulation of real space through immaterium interference, it observed. Refined beyond typical human application. Fascinating. Before Anakin could press his advantage, the air around them shimmered again. More Necron warriors appeared through rectangular portals, their weapons already firing into the Black Templar ranks. Vane and his Marines fought with religious fury, chainswords revving and power weapons crackling as they engaged in close combat with the skeletal constructs. But for each Necron they managed to destroy completely. 3 more teleported onto the landing pad to replace it. The weight of numbers would soon become insurmountable. "We will return to continue our examination," the Overlord told Anakin, raising its staff once more. Your presence heralds a mathematical anomaly that must be resolved before the one great work can proceed. A sphere of green energy expanded outward from the staff, encompassing the Overlord and its immediate guards. When it receded, they had vanished, teleported back to their vessel, hovering overhead. The remaining warriors continued their advance, sacrificial pawns meant to occupy the Imperial forces while the Overlord withdrew to recalculate its approach. Vane appeared at Anakin's side, his armor dented and scorched from Necron weapon impacts. "The landing pad is lost," the Marshal acknowledged grimly. "We must withdraw to secondary positions and coordinate a larger counterattack." Anakin nodded, his tactical assessment matching the Space Marines. They began fighting their way back toward the fortress proper, the surviving Black Templars forming a disciplined rearguard action. As they reached the armored doors leading into the monastery, Anakin glanced back at the Necron vessels hovering in formation above. He felt the Overlord's continued attention, a cold, calculating observation that transcended mere physical senses. Whatever these ancient machines wanted from him, they would not abandon their pursuit easily. Inside the fortress, strategic planning was already underway. Hololithic displays showed Necron forces landing at multiple locations across Armageddon, concentrating particularly on sites of ancient ruins or geological anomalies. Greyfax stood at the center of the command sanctum, coordinating reports from Imperial Guard regiments, Black Templar strike forces, and even civilian militia that had been pressed into service against the Xenos threat. "The pattern is clear," she announced as Vane and Anakin entered. "They are securing access points to the subsurface tomb complex. If they reactivate the full necropolis beneath the equatorial deserts, we lose the planet." Vane studied the tactical display, his helmet now removed to reveal a scarred, augmented face that had witnessed centuries of warfare. "We cannot match them in void warfare," he noted, indicating the Necron vessels that now controlled Armageddon's orbit. "Our focus must be on destroying their ground forces and sealing the primary tomb entrance." "They want me," Anakin interjected, drawing surprised looks from the Imperial commanders. The Overlord made that clear. "My presence here represents some kind of mathematical anomaly in their calculations, a variable they did not anticipate." Greyfax turned to him, her augmetic eye whirring as it focused. "Explain." Anakin described his encounter with the Necron Overlord, the strange conversation, and the being's evident interest in his extra-dimensional origins. As he spoke, Greyfax's expression shifted from skepticism to grim understanding. "The Necrons are known to possess technology that can monitor the fabric of reality itself," she confirmed. "If your arrival somehow disrupted their long-term plans, they would indeed seek to study or eliminate you." "Then we use that to our advantage," Vane declared. "The outsider becomes bait to draw their leadership into a trap." Anakin felt a cold familiarity at the words. How many times had he been used as bait during the Clone Wars? How many elaborate traps had he and Obi-Wan laid for Count Dooku, General Grievous, or other separatist leaders? The strategy was sound, but something about slipping back into the role of weapon, of tool, ignited a spark of resistance within him. "I will not be a passive participant in this plan," he stated firmly. "If I am to be bait, I will also be hunter." Vane and Greyfax exchanged glances, a silent communication between two individuals accustomed to authority and unused to being challenged. It was the Inquisitor who spoke first. "What do you propose, outsider?" Anakin stepped forward, manipulating the hololithic display with his augmetic hand. The image zoomed in on a particular geological formation near the equator, a massive rift valley that sensors indicated extended kilometers beneath the planet's surface. "Their primary tomb complex is here," he said with certainty, though he could not have explained how he knew. The knowledge simply existed in his mind, placed there perhaps by his brief mental contact with the Overlord. "I will travel there alone. My presence will draw their leadership as you suggest. But rather than waiting in prepared defenses, I will penetrate the tomb complex itself." "Madness," Vane dismissed immediately. The defenses within a Necron tomb would destroy a single intruder instantly. Not if they want me alive for study, Anakin countered. The Overlord had multiple opportunities to kill me during our encounter. It chose not to. Whatever anomaly I represent, they wish to understand it before eliminating it. Greyfax studied him with narrowed eyes. And once inside, what then? Every system has a center, Anakin explained. A control node, a command nexus. Find that, and the entire structure becomes vulnerable. He thought of the trade, Federation control ships he had destroyed as a child, of the droid command centers he had sabotaged during countless Clone War battles. These Necrons may be ancient and powerful, but they are still machines following programmed directives. Destroy the program, and the machine fails. The Inquisitor smiled thinly. A surprisingly insightful analysis from one so new to our reality. But finding this control node within a structure designed by inhuman minds, spanning kilometers of subsurface engineering, would be nearly impossible. I will be guided, Anakin said simply. By what? Vane demanded. The warp? You would trust the whispers of daemons? By the Force, Anakin corrected. It exists even here, beneath the corruption of what you call the warp. I have felt it, guiding my actions, showing me paths invisible to conventional senses. It will lead me to the heart of their complex. Greyfax exchanged another look with Vane, this one longer, weighted with unspoken concerns. Finally, the Inquisitor nodded once. The plan has merit, she conceded. While the outsider penetrates the tomb complex, our combined forces can launch diversionary attacks against secondary entrances, drawing defenders away from the primary site. If he succeeds in locating and destroying their control systems, the entire Necron force might be temporarily neutralized. And if he fails? Vane questioned. Or worse, is captured and his unique abilities somehow weaponized by the Xenos. Then Exterminatus becomes our only option, Greyfax replied coldly. Better to scorch Armageddon to atomic ash than allow the Necrons to incorporate warp manipulation into their technology. Anakin felt a chill at the casual mention of planetary destruction, but kept his expression neutral. These humans had lived so long with apocalyptic threats that such measures had become merely another tactical option. Their galaxy truly was darker than his own, where even at the height of imperial cruelty, the destruction of worlds remained an act of last resort. How soon can we move? He asked, refocusing on the immediate plan. Dawn, Vane answered. My chapter requires time to consecrate weapons and armor for the coming battle. The machine god's blessing must be secured for our tanks and aircraft. The Emperor's light must shine upon our endeavor. Anakin nodded, though inwardly he chafed at the delay. Ritual and religion dictating military timetables, just as the Jedi Council's deliberations had so often frustrated him during the Clone Wars. Some things, it seemed, remained constant across universes. I will need transportation to the tomb entrance, he said. Something fast and maneuverable. A land speeder can be provided, Vane offered, though you would be exposed to enemy fire during your approach. Anakin almost smiled at that. I have some experience with vehicles under combat conditions, he assured the Marshal. He did not elaborate, keeping the memories of pod racers, starfighters, and countless other craft to himself. Let them continue to underestimate him. It would make his eventual independence all the easier to secure. As the command staff dispersed to prepare for the coming operation, Greyfax lingered behind. She approached Anakin directly, her augmetic eye whirring as it scanned him at microscopic levels. I have sanctioned this plan because it serves the Imperium's immediate needs, she said quietly. But make no mistake, outsider, you remain an anomaly in more ways than one. The Inquisition does not leave such loose ends untended indefinitely. Anakin met her gaze steadily. I understand the threat implicit in your words, Inquisitor, but consider this. If I succeed tomorrow, you will have witnessed what I am capable of accomplishing. Would you rather have such power working alongside your Imperium, or against it? Greyfax's expression remained impassive, but Anakin sensed the calculation behind her eyes, A question many have asked. Throughout Imperial history, she replied, the answer has rarely favored the powerful individual over the stability of the whole. With that cryptic response, she turned and left the command sanctum, leaving Anakin alone with the hololithic display still showing the vast Necron tomb complex waiting beneath Armageddon's surface. He studied it intently, memorizing what little Imperial scans had been able to reveal of its structure. Tomorrow would determine not just the fate of this planet, but his own place in this new universe. The dark side had always tempted him with promises of power and freedom from constraint. Here, in this grim, dark future, those temptations would be stronger than ever. The question that remained was whether he would succumb as he had once before, or forge a new path between extremes. Dawn broke across Armageddon's blasted landscape in shades of toxic amber and radiation scarlet. The sky above remained darkened by the geometric shapes of Necron vessels, hovering in perfect formation, casting long shadows across the sprawling hive cities and industrial complexes that defined human occupation of this war-torn world. From the fortress monastery of the Black Templars, a single land speeder launched, its anti-grav engines propelling it forward at tremendous speed. Alone and exposed, it represented either madness or supreme confidence to the observers on both sides of the conflict about to engulf the planet. Anakin Skywalker felt alive for the first time since his arrival in this universe. The landspeeder responded to his augmetic hands with surprising sensitivity, its machine spirit seemingly eager to perform beyond normal parameters under his guidance. Vane had insisted on blessing the vehicle before Anakin's departure, anointing it with sacred oils and intoning prayers to the Omnissiah for mechanical reliability. Anakin had endured the ritual with outward patience while inwardly adjusting the engine timing and recalibrating the stabilizer array through his direct neural interface with the craft systems. Now he flew across the desert at breakneck speed, pushing the land speeder to velocities that would have killed a normal pilot through blackout-inducing G-forces. His mechanical body absorbed the strain while his mind reached out through what remained of his connection to the Force. The maelstrom of the warp still roared at the edges of his awareness, but he had learned to filter its corrupting influence, focusing instead on the pure current of energy that flowed beneath the chaos. It was weaker here than in his home galaxy, more diffuse and harder to grasp, but it existed, and through it he could sense the Necron presence ahead, a vast, cold emptiness in the fabric of reality itself. The first Necron response came in the form of doom scythes, crescent-shaped flyers that detached from the larger vessels overhead and dove toward his position. Their weapons charged with emerald energy, preparing to erase him from existence with molecular disassembling beams. Anakin smiled grimly, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that combat had always triggered in him. He threw the land speeder into an impossibly tight turn, hugging the terrain as he weaved between rock formations at speeds that transformed the landscape into a blur. The Necron craft followed with mechanical precision, adjusting their trajectory to account for his evasive maneuvers. They were fast, and their targeting systems superhumanly accurate, but they lacked the intuitive understanding of flight that had made Anakin legendary among the Jedi. He juked the land speeder sideways just as the first energy beam lanced toward him, letting it pass overhead by centimeters before corkscrewing around a natural stone arch and accelerating toward a narrow canyon. The doom scythes pursued, their inhuman pilots calculating the most efficient vectors to intercept their quarry. What they could not calculate was the element of instinct, the split-second decisions that defied logical analysis. Anakin waited until the last possible moment before cutting power to the land speeder's left gravitational impeller, sending the craft into a flat spin that carried it through a gap in the canyon wall barely wide enough for its hull. The pursuing Necron flyers attempted to match his maneuver but lacked the necessary control surfaces for such an extreme course correction. The first crashed into the canyon wall in a spectacular explosion of green energy. The second managed to pull up but lost sight of its target in the process. Anakin emerged from the canyon on a new heading, pushing the land speeder's engines beyond their rated maximums as he raced toward the primary tomb entrance. Imperial intelligence indicated it lay within a massive impact crater, the remnant of an ancient meteorite strike that had actually been the landing site of a Necron seed ship millions of years earlier. As he crested the final ridge separating him from his objective, the full scale of the complex became apparent. A vast pit yawned before him, at least 10 kilometers in diameter and descending into darkness beyond visual range. Concentric rings of metallic structures lined its interior, glowing with the same green energy that powered all Necron technology. At the exact center, a pyramid of black stone rose from the depths, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt the human mind to observe directly. Around this central structure swarmed countless Necron warriors, immortals, and more exotic variants Anakin had not yet encountered. A steady stream of reinforcements continued to teleport in from the vessels overhead, preparing for the Imperial counterattack that Greyfax and Vane were supposedly launching against secondary tomb entrances across the region. For a moment, Anakin hesitated. The sheer scale of the Necron presence exceeded even the most pessimistic Imperial estimates. To enter that pit alone seemed like certain death or capture, yet as he watched, he noticed something odd. The Necron forces were indeed preparing defensive positions, but they were oriented outward, toward the expected Imperial assault. The path leading directly down into the central pyramid remained relatively unguarded, almost as if, "They're expecting me," Anakin murmured to himself, "counting on me to come." The realization should have given him pause, made him reconsider the wisdom of his plan. Instead, he felt a surge of grim determination. If the Necrons wanted him to enter their domain, he would oblige them, but not as the passive study subject they anticipated. He had been underestimated before, by the Jedi Council, by Obi-Wan, by the Emperor himself. Each time, it had proven a fatal mistake for those who failed to recognize the full extent of his power and determination. Anakin gunned the land speeder's engines one final time, sending it hurtling over the crater's edge in a steep dive toward the central pyramid. He anticipated defensive fire from the Necron warriors below, but it never materialized. They tracked his descent with glowing green eyes, but held their positions, confirming his suspicion that orders had been given regarding his arrival. The lack of resistance was almost more unsettling than open hostility would have been. He brought the land speeder to a hovering stop directly before the pyramid's entrance, a triangular portal of absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light rather than merely block it. No guards stood before it, no obvious defensive systems covered its approach. An invitation could not have been clearer had it been verbalized. Anakin stepped from the land speeder, his reconstructed lightsaber in hand but not yet ignited. His augmetic legs carried him to the threshold of the entrance, where he paused, reaching out with his senses. The interior of the pyramid radiated cold, both physical and spiritual. It was a void in the Force, a place where the energy field that connected all living things simply ceased to exist. But deeper within, at the very heart of the structure, he sensed something else. A pulse, a rhythm, a pattern that resonated with mathematical precision. The control node he sought, the heart of the Necron presence on Armageddon. With a deep breath that his mechanical lungs processed into optimized oxygen saturation, Anakin stepped into the darkness. The interior revealed itself in stages, green luminescence activating in sequential patterns as he progressed deeper. The architecture defied human convention, with corridors that seemed to bend in impossible directions and chambers whose dimensions changed depending on the angle from which they were observed. Anakin maintained his bearing through a combination of mechanical spatial awareness and the fragmentary guidance of the Force. The latter grew increasingly unreliable as he descended, the connection becoming static-filled and distorted, like a comms system experiencing interference. He encountered no resistance, no guardians barring his path. The absence of opposition confirmed his theory that his arrival was not merely expected but desired. The Necrons were allowing him to penetrate to the heart of their complex, curious perhaps to see what he would do once he arrived. The thought that he was behaving exactly as they predicted chafed against Anakin's pride, his eternal resistance to being controlled or manipulated by others. But he proceeded nonetheless, knowing that sometimes the expected path held unexpected opportunities. After what seemed like hours of traversing the non-Euclidean corridors of the pyramid, Anakin emerged into a vast central chamber. The space defied conventional geometry, appearing simultaneously larger inside than should have been physically possible given the pyramid's external dimensions. At its center stood a column of pure energy, green lightning coruscating upward in intricate fractal patterns. Around this column, arranged in a perfect circle, stood 12 Necron lords, each more ornate and ancient-looking than the overlord Anakin had confronted at the fortress monastery. Their skeletal forms were draped in scaled metal cloaks, their heads adorned with crowns of impossibly thin spires. And at the head of this circle, seated upon a throne of black stone shot through with veins of living metal, waited a being whose presence dominated the chamber like a gravity well. The Necron Pharaon was twice the height of its lords, its skeletal frame enhanced with additional segments that created an impression of regal bearing despite its inhuman nature. The skull face was elongated, the green eyes set deeper and burning with an intelligence that transcended mere mechanical cognition. When it spoke, the words formed directly in Anakin's mind, bypassing his augmetic auditory systems entirely. "The anomaly arrives as calculated," the Pharaon observed, its mental voice carrying the weight of eons. "Though your path through our dominion displayed unexpected deviations from optimal efficiency." Anakin stood before the assembled Necron hierarchy, his lightsaber still unignited at his side. He sensed no immediate threat from them, only an intense, clinical curiosity that reminded him uncomfortably of Kaminoan scientists examining clone troopers. "I am not a calculation," Anakin responded, his mechanical voice echoing strangely in the chamber, "nor an anomaly to be studied and categorized." "All things are calculations," the Pharaon corrected him. "The movement of stars, the evolution of species, the rise and fall of galactic empires. Existence itself is a grand equation seeking resolution. You represent an unexpected variable introduced from outside the system, a disruption in the pattern we have spent 60 million years perfecting." The scale of time casually referenced sent a chill through Anakin's remaining organic components. The Necrons had been executing whatever plan they called the Great Work since before mammals had evolved on ancient Earth. What purpose could possibly sustain focus across such a span? "What pattern?" he asked, genuine curiosity overcoming his wariness. "What is this great work your kind values above all else?" The Pharaon's eyes flared slightly brighter. "The severance," it answered simply. "The final separation of real space from the immaterium. The closing of the circle that will forever end the threat of chaos and return the galaxy to blessed entropy." Understanding dawned in Anakin's mind. "You seek to destroy the warp itself," he said, the implications staggering him. "To sever this reality's connection to the realm of psychic energy." "Not destruction," the Pharaon corrected. "Containment. Isolation. The warp exists because sentient minds perceive reality subjectively rather than objectively. Emotion and belief given form through collective psychic resonance. By altering the fundamental constants of this galaxy, we will create a permanent barrier between the material and immaterial. No more daemons, no more gods, only the perfect, eternal silence of the void." Anakin considered the vast ambition behind these words. In a sense, the Necrons sought what the Emperor in his own galaxy had tried to achieve: the final victory of order over chaos, logic over emotion, certainty over possibility. But where Palpatine had sought to rule over that ordered galaxy, the Necrons desired only to exist within it, free from the psychic predators that had tormented them in ages past. "And my arrival interferes with this plan somehow," Anakin prompted. "You are a nexus of probability," one of the lords spoke, its mental voice distinguishable from the Pharaon's by a higher harmonic frequency. "Your transfer between realities has created quantum entanglement patterns we cannot fully model. The calculations indicate a 17.83% reduction in success probability for the Severance Project due to your presence alone." Anakin almost smiled at the precision of the figure. Because I can use the Force. Because I represent a connection to the immaterium that you cannot predict or control. Partially correct, the Pharaoh acknowledged. But more concerning is the nature of that connection. You draw upon both light and darkness in equal measure, without corruption or dissolution of your core pattern. Such balance defies the binary nature of psychic energy in this reality, where any significant use of immaterium power inevitably leads to chaos, corruption. The observation struck Anakin deeply. It was true that since his arrival, he had drawn upon what would have been considered both light and dark side energies in his home galaxy. The rage and pain that had fueled his final confrontation with Obi-Wan remained within him, but so too did the compassion and sense of justice that had defined his years as a Jedi Knight. Here, in this dark reflection of his own universe, the absolute distinction between light and dark had blurred, revealing a more nuanced spectrum that perhaps had always existed beneath Jedi and Sith dogma. "What do you intend to do with me?" Anakin asked, though he suspected the answer. "Study, deconstruction, incorporation of applicable paradigms into the grand calculation," the Pharaoh stated with mechanical dispassion. "Your physical form is irrelevant. It is the quantum state of your consciousness that presents both problem and opportunity." Anakin felt his grip tighten on his lightsaber. "And if I refuse to be studied?" A sound like metal grinding against crystal filled the chamber, which Anakin belatedly recognized as the Necron equivalent of laughter. Refusal was accounted for with 99.97% probability, the Pharaoh informed him. "Containment protocols have been active since you entered the primary corridor. Your locomotion is permitted only because it provides additional behavioral data." As if to citation, demonstrate the truth of these words. Green energy suddenly crackled around Anakin's augmetic limbs, freezing them in place despite the maximum power he directed through their servo motors. A similar field enveloped his chest and head, leaving only his organic hand free to move within a limited range. His lightsaber remained unignited in his frozen mechanical grip. Resistance was also calculated, the Pharaoh continued, rising from its throne with deliberate slowness. "Though the specific method you will employ remains of interest." Anakin felt cold rage building within him, the familiar darkness that had always responded to constraint or captivity. The Necrons were treating him as a laboratory specimen, a curiosity to be dissected and understood before being discarded. It reminded him too much of how the Jedi Council had regarded him as the chosen one to be molded and directed, rather than a person with his own desires and agency. He had destroyed the Jedi for such arrogance. He would not submit to these mechanical tyrants either. He reached deep within himself, past the anger, past the fear, to the core of power that had always been his birthright. The Force responded sluggishly at first, distorted by the strange technology surrounding him and the distance from the pure cosmic energy he had known in his home galaxy. But it was there, waiting to be called upon by one strong enough to command it. Blood began to trickle from Anakin's nose and ears as he exerted his will against the Necron containment field, not fighting it directly but rather altering the space it occupied, creating a bubble of reality that responded to his commands rather than their technology. The Pharaoh observed this effort with evident interest, its skull face incapable of expressing emotion, yet somehow radiating intense concentration. Fascinating, it communicated directly into Anakin's mind. Local space-time manipulation through psychic resonance, a technique unknown in our extensive cataloging of warp phenomena. Anakin ignored the commentary, focusing his entire being on the task at hand. The containment field began to flicker, green energy stuttering as it encountered regions where the fundamental laws of physics had been subtly altered. With a final surge of effort that left him gasping through his mechanical respirator, Anakin shattered the field completely. He ignited his lightsaber in the same motion, the white blade humming to life with a sound that seemed to violate the sepulchral quiet of the Necron chamber. The circle of lords reacted with inhuman speed, each drawing weapons that ranged from energy staves to more exotic devices whose function Anakin could only guess at. They did not attack immediately, however, instead looking to the Phaeron for direction. The ancient being remained motionless on its throne, skull face tilted slightly, as if in contemplation. An unexpected development, it acknowledged, its mental voice betraying no concern. The probability matrix requires recalculation. Anakin assumed a defensive stance, lightsaber held before him. "I am not an equation to be solved," he said firmly. "I am not a specimen to be studied. I am Anakin Skywalker, and I will determine my own fate in this galaxy or any other." "Your designation is noted," the Phaeron responded, "but irrelevant to the greater calculation. Individual identity is a temporary state, a brief fluctuation in the eternal pattern. In time, all returns to blessed entropy." With those cryptic words, the Phaeron raised a hand. Reality itself seemed to warp around the gesture, space folding inward to create a portal similar to those Anakin had witnessed Necron warriors using to teleport. But this portal was larger, its edges crackling with energies that registered as wrongness to Anakin's force sensitivity. Through it, he could see not another location on Armageddon, but what appeared to be the interior of a vast machine, a complexity of moving parts and energy conduits that dwarfed anything he had encountered, even in the most advanced core world technologies. "Behold the heart of our great work," the Phaeron told him, a note of what might have been pride entering its mental voice. "The celestial orrery, a perfect replica of every star in the galaxy, quantum entangled with their actual counterparts. Through it, we monitor and adjust the fundamental constants of reality itself, preparing for the moment when the final calculations are complete and the severance can be initiated." Anakin stared in awe at the machine visible through the portal. The implications were staggering. The ability to affect stars directly, to potentially trigger supernovae or alter stellar chemistry across the entire galaxy. Such power dwarfed even the Death Star of his home universe, which could destroy only a single planet at a time. The Necrons could unmake reality itself if this machine functioned as described. "You show me this, why?" Anakin asked, never lowering his guard despite his fascination. "Because you represent a potential alternative approach," the Phaeron explained. "Your ability to maintain psychic equilibrium between what your kind terms light and dark suggests a third path we had not calculated. Not the severance of real space from immaterium, but a balanced integration of both. A paradigm shift that our race, in our hatred of the old ones and the chaos they unleashed, never considered viable." For the first time since entering the tomb complex, Anakin felt truly unsettled. The Necron Phaeron was suggesting that his own internal struggle, his lifelong battle to reconcile the light and dark aspects of his nature, might represent a solution to the galaxy-wide conflict that had raged for millions of years. It seemed absurd on its face, yet something in the ancient machine's words resonated with Anakin's deepest instincts. "I am not a paradigm," he said finally. "I am a man who has failed as often as he has succeeded in maintaining that balance. Who fell to darkness once before and nearly lost everything because of it." "Precisely," the Phaeron agreed, to Anakin's surprise. "You have experienced both extremes and returned to the median state. A cycle of fall and redemption that mirrors the greater pattern of galactic evolution. Perhaps it is not perfect stasis that represents the ideal, but controlled oscillation between opposing forces. A dynamic equilibrium rather than entropy." The circle of Necron lords stirred at these words, their movements suggesting agitation or disagreement. One stepped forward, its ornate frame suggesting great age and authority even by the standards of these ancient beings. "Heresy against the great work," Phaeron Ahmontek, the Lord accused, its mental voice harsh with mechanical distortion. 60 million years of calculation cannot be discarded based on a single anomalous data point. The severance must proceed as planned. The Phaeron, now identified as Ahmontek, turned its skull face toward the dissenting lord. "All data must be incorporated into the calculation, Vargard Oberon. To do otherwise is to perpetuate error." The anomaly presents an opportunity to refine our approach, not abandon it. Anakin sensed the political currents flowing beneath this exchange. Not all the Necron hierarchy agreed with Ahmontek's apparent willingness to consider alternatives to their ancient plan. He might exploit this division, but to what end? His original mission to destroy the control node of the Necron forces on Armageddon now seemed both impossible and potentially short-sighted, given the cosmic scale of what he had discovered. Before he could decide on a course of action, the chamber shuddered violently. Dust and fragments of metallic architecture rained down from the impossibly high ceiling. The portal showing the celestial orrery flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Imperial assault forces have breached the outer defenses. One of the lords reported, its mental voice devoid of concern despite the information conveyed. Black Templar Terminators, supported by Mechanicus Skitarii and Inquisitorial Stormtroopers. They deploy psionic disruption fields consistent with anti-Necron protocols developed on Somonor. Anakin realized with a mixture of surprise and grudging respect that Vane and Greyfax had actually launched the promised diversionary attack, and with greater effectiveness than he had anticipated. Perhaps the Imperium's endless war experience counted for something after all. Ahmontek rose from his throne, skeletal form unfolding to its full imposing height. "The human vermin seek to prevent our awakening on this world," the Pharaon observed dispassionately. "Their efforts are futile, but may delay the excavation phase by up to 7 solar years. Unacceptable inefficiency." "Let me stop them," Anakin offered impulsively, seeing an opportunity to extricate himself from the current standoff. "I understand their tactics, their weaknesses. I can convince them to withdraw without further damage to your operations." The Pharaon regarded him with that unreadable skull face. "A transparent attempt to escape further study," it noted, "yet potentially useful in its outcome. Very well, anomaly. Convince your human allies to withdraw. In exchange, we shall postpone your deconstruction and consider the alternative paradigm you represent." Anakin knew a temporary reprieve when he heard one, but it was better than remaining trapped in the heart of the Necron tomb complex. He nodded once, a gesture the Pharaon seemed to understand despite its inhuman nature. "I will need transport to the Imperial assault force," Anakin said, "and communications access." Ahmontek gestured to one of the lords, who stepped forward and extended a hand. A small metallic scarab materialized in its palm, legs twitching with apparent life, though clearly mechanical in nature. "This will guide you to the optimal interception point," the Pharaon explained. "It will also serve as proof of our arrangement when you communicate with your kind." Anakin took the scarab gingerly between thumb and forefinger of his organic hand. The creature remained motionless, apparently dormant until needed. He secured it within a compartment of his augmetic arm, then turned to leave the chamber. "Remember, anomaly." Ahmontek's mental voice followed him as he departed. "Our calculations now include your actions as a variable. Deviation from the projected path will be noted and accounted for." Anakin did not reply, focusing instead on navigating the complex corridors that would lead him back to the surface. Behind him, he sensed the Necron hierarchy already turning their attention to other matters, his temporary reprieve merely a minor adjustment in plans spanning millions of years. He would need to find a way to transform that temporary advantage into something more permanent. And soon, the journey back through the pyramid passed more quickly than his entry had, whether due to different routes being made available or some manipulation of time itself within the non-Euclidean spaces. When Anakin finally emerged into Armageddon's toxic daylight, he found the crater transformed into a war zone. Imperial forces had indeed breached the outer defenses, with Black Templar Terminators in their distinctive black armor, engaged in close combat with Necron immortals along the upper tiers. Mechanicus Skitarii advanced in perfect lockstep behind them, their radium weapons causing localized disruptions in the Necrons' self-repair protocols. Above the battlefield, Imperial Thunderhawk gunships dueled with doom scythes in the poisonous skies, while artillery batteries on both sides exchanged fire across the crater's vast diameter. The scarab suddenly animated, crawling from Anakin's augmetic compartment to perch on his shoulder. It extended crystalline wings that hummed with energy, creating a shimmering field around Anakin that he suspected would identify him as a non-combatant to Necron targeting systems. The creature then pointed with one metallic limb toward the northeast quadrant of the crater rim, where the heaviest fighting appeared to be concentrated. Anakin began moving in that direction, his augmetic legs carrying him rapidly across the uneven terrain. He avoided direct engagement with either Necron or Imperial forces, though both clearly registered his presence. Necron warriors stepped aside to create paths for him, while Imperial guardsmen called out warnings and trained weapons in his direction without firing. His distinctive appearance and the white lightsaber now ignited in his hand likely made identification easy for the human forces. He reached the base of the crater wall where Imperial sappers had blasted a path down from the rim. Following this improvised road upward, Anakin soon encountered the command element of the assault force. Marshal Vane stood surrounded by his command squad, power armor blackened and dented from combat but still functional. Nearby, Inquisitor Greyfax coordinated with a tech priest Margos, their discussion apparently focused on some arcane device the Mechanicus had deployed against the Necron forces. It was Greyfax who noticed Anakin's approach first, her augmetic eye whirring as it zoomed in on his ascending figure. She raised a hand, signaling to nearby stormtroopers who immediately trained hellguns on the newcomer. Vane turned, his skull faced helm betraying no emotion, though his body language suggested surprise at Anakin's emergence from the heart of the Necron complex. "Hold fire," the Marshal ordered, stepping forward to meet Anakin at the edge of the command position. The outsider returns, though whether as ally or compromised asset remains to be seen. Anakin stopped a respectful distance from the Imperial leaders, aware of the tension his arrival created. "I have made contact with the Necron leadership," he announced, without preamble. "Their forces on Armageddon are directed by a Pharaon named Armontek, an entity of immense age and power." Greyfax stepped forward, her neural whip uncoiling from her belt, though not yet energized. "And what corrupted bargain did you strike with the Xenos abomination?" she demanded, her voice hard with suspicion. "No bargain," Anakin replied carefully. "But I have gained insight into their purposes here. This tomb complex is more than a conventional Necron installation. It serves as an access node to something they call the Celestial Orrery, a device capable of manipulating the fundamental constants of reality across the entire galaxy." The tech priest Magos made the sign of the Omnissiah across his chest, metal fingers tracing precise patterns in the air. "The orrery is a mechanicum legend," he intoned, his vox unit crackling with static. "A machine of such complexity and power that it borders on tech heresy merely to contemplate its existence. If the Xenos possess such a device, then this conflict has implications far beyond Armageddon," Vane concluded grimly. "Explain yourself quickly, outsider. Why have you returned to us rather than being dissected by the soulless ones?" Anakin produced the Necron scarab from his augmetic compartment, holding it up for the Imperial leaders to see. The creature remained motionless in his palm, its crystalline wings folded against its metallic body. "The Necron Pharaon wishes to avoid unnecessary damage to the tomb complex," Anakin explained. "He has authorized me to negotiate a temporary cessation of hostilities while both sides reassess their positions." Greyfax laughed harshly. "Negotiate? With Xenos? The Imperium does not bargain with the enemies of mankind. Our position is unalterable. Exterminate us if necessary, but the Necron presence on Armageddon will be excised, regardless of cost." Anakin had anticipated this response. The Imperium's xenophobic dogma was as rigid as any he had encountered, including the worst excesses of Palpatine's human-centric policies. But he had also learned that beneath the inflexible ideology often lay practical considerations that could be leveraged. The cost would be total, he countered calmly. The Necron forces here represent only a fraction of their full strength. Amontek commands a dynasty spanning dozens of tomb worlds across this sector. If provoked to full awakening, they could deploy forces that would overwhelm not just Armageddon but every Imperial world within 100 light years. Is that a price the Imperium is prepared to pay? Vane and Greyfax exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The Marshal turned to Anakin, his voice hard but pragmatic. What alternative does the Xenos Overlord propose? A research accord, Anakin replied, choosing his words carefully. The Necrons have identified something unique in my nature, a potential third path in their ancient conflict with what they call the Old Ones. They wish time to study this possibility before committing to more aggressive action. And in exchange, Greyfax pressed, clearly skeptical, they will limit their awakening on Armageddon to the primary tomb complex only. No expansion to secondary sites, no attacks on Imperial positions unless provoked. A stalemate that benefits both sides by preventing mutually assured destruction. The tech priest Magos made a sound of mechanical distress. 1. Consorting with Xenos technology violates 16 primary directives of the Mechanicus, he objected. To allow the Necrons unfettered access to their tomb complex risks technological contamination of unacceptable levels. And yet the Omnicia teaches that knowledge itself is sacred, Anakin countered, drawing on what he had learned about Imperial cult dogma during his convalescence. The Necrons possess technological understanding dating back 60 million years. Consider what might be gleaned from careful observation of their activities, even at a distance. This argument appeared to give the tech priest pause, his mechadendrites writhing in what might have been agitation or calculation. Vane turned to Greyfax, whose authority as an inquisitor gave her final say in matters involving Xenos contact. The strategic calculation has merit, the Marshal admitted reluctantly. Our forces are stretched thin across the sector. A full-scale Necron awakening would require reinforcements we cannot currently spare from the Sharadon front. Greyfax's expression remained hard, but Anakin sensed the weight of responsibility behind her augmetic gaze. The Inquisition's purpose was ultimately to preserve humanity, even when that required difficult compromises against ideological purity. A temporary accord, she finally pronounced, strictly limited in scope and duration. The Imperium will maintain observation positions around the primary tomb complex, but withdraw offensive forces to a perimeter 5 kilometers from the crater edge. Any Necron activity beyond the agreed boundary will result in immediate exterminatus protocols. Anakin nodded, relieved that the Inquisitor had accepted the pragmatic approach. I will convey these terms to Amontek, he said, though I believe they will be acceptable. And your role in this arrangement? Vane asked, his tone suggesting he already suspected the answer. I will remain as intermediary, Anakin confirmed, moving between Imperial and Necron forces to maintain communication and ensure adherence to the accord. It places me in the optimal position to gather intelligence for both sides while preventing misunderstandings that could lead to renewed conflict. What he did not articulate was that such a position also granted him a measure of independence he had not enjoyed since his arrival in this universe, no longer merely a weapon to be wielded by the Imperium, nor a specimen to be dissected by the Necrons. For the first time, he held value to both sides that derived from his unique nature rather than just his combat prowess or psychic potential. It was a tenuous position, but one from which he could begin to chart his own course in this grim, dark future. Greyfax studied him intently, her augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. You play a dangerous game, outsider, she observed quietly. The Inquisition will be watching your every movement, every interaction with the Xenos. One hint of corruption or heresy, and not even your unusual origins will save you. I understand, Anakin replied simply. He had lived under similar scrutiny from the Jedi Council for most of his life. The weight of suspicion was a familiar burden, one he had learned to bear long ago. Vane gave orders for the Imperial forces to begin their tactical withdrawal to the new perimeter, while the tech priest Magos dispatched servitors to place monitoring devices around the crater rim. Greyfax moved closer to Anakin, speaking in tones too low for others to overhear. "I do not know what truly transpired within that tomb," she said, "but I recognize ambition when I see it. Whatever game you think you are playing with forces beyond your comprehension, remember that greater minds than yours have been driven to madness or corruption by such hubris." Anakin met her gaze steadily. "In my galaxy, I was called the Chosen One," he replied, his mechanical voice equally quiet, "destined to bring balance to the Force. I failed in that destiny once before, seduced by promises of power and freedom from the constraints imposed by those who feared my potential. I will not make the same mistake in this reality." "See that you don't," Greyfax warned. "The Emperor's mercy extends only so far, even to anomalies such as yourself." With that final caution, she turned and departed to oversee the withdrawal of her inquisitorial stormtroopers. Anakin remained at the crater's edge, the Necron scarab once more perched on his shoulder as if observing the proceedings with its crystalline eyes. Behind him, the vast tomb complex continued its awakening sequence, green energy pulsing through ancient circuitry as systems dormant for millions of years returned to operational status. Before him, the Imperial forces established their new defensive positions, faith and firepower their bulwarks against the alien threat they had agreed to temporarily tolerate. Anakin Skywalker stood at the boundary between these two incompatible realities, belonging fully to neither. In his home galaxy, he had been torn between Jedi and Sith, Republic and Empire, light and dark. Here, in this harsher reflection of that universe, he found himself in a similarly liminal position. But perhaps that was precisely where he needed to be, the fulcrum upon which opposing forces balanced, the mediator between extremes, not chosen by prophecy or fate, but by the unique circumstances of his transdimensional exile. As Armageddon's toxic sun began to set beyond the fault, western horizon, casting long shadows across the blasted landscape, Anakin ignited his lightsaber once more. The white blade hummed with energy that was neither purely light nor dark, but something that transcended such binary categorization. In its glow, he saw not the failed promise of his previous life, but the potential for a new path in this universe of endless war and diminishing hope. Balance was possible, even here in the grim darkness of the far future. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had finally found the role he was truly meant to play. The Necron scarab's wings suddenly extended, catching the dying light of Armageddon's sun. A holographic projection appeared above it, the skull face of Pharaon Amontek, rendered in miniature but no less imposing for its reduced size. "The humans withdraw as you predicted," the ancient machine observed. "Your understanding of their psychology appears accurate, despite your extra-dimensional origin." "They are not so different from the Puntust, humans of my galaxy," Anakin replied, "pragmatic when necessary, despite their dogma. The accord will hold as long as both sides perceive advantage in maintaining it." "A temporary calculation only," Amontek reminded him. "The great work continues regardless of local adjustments. The question that remains is your place within it, anomaly. Will you embrace the paradigm shift you represent, or cling to outdated binary conceptions of your power?" Anakin stared into the green eyes of the projection, seeing in them the weight of eons and the cold precision of a mind that had transcended mortality at the cost of its soul. "I will find my own way," he answered, "as I always have." The projection flickered once, then vanished, the scarab once more becoming dormant on Anakin's shoulder. He turned his gaze toward the Imperial lines where Marshal Vane and Inquisitor Greyfax would be planning their next moves, calculating how best to exploit the temporary peace while preparing for its inevitable collapse. Both sides would use him, study him, attempt to bend him to their purposes. The Necrons seeing in him a mathematical anomaly that might refine their ancient plans, the Imperium viewing him as a potential weapon to be directed against their countless enemies. Neither understood what it meant to be the chosen one, to bear the burden of balance in a galaxy defined by extremes. But here, cast into this dark reflection of his home reality, Anakin Skywalker would finally discover the truth of that destiny. Not through prophecy or manipulation, but through choices made in the crucible of necessity. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, he would forge a third path, one that belonged neither to the soulless certainty of the Necrons nor the dogmatic faith of the Imperium, but to humanity's potential for transcendence beyond both. The white blade of his lightsaber cut a path through the gathering darkness as Anakin began the long walk back to the Imperial lines. The first step on a journey that would transform not just his fate, but the fate of this war-torn galaxy. For in the end, the Force would find balance, even here, even now. And he would be its instrument, not by design or decree, but by choice.